Hello YouTube, I'm Darren Ruggan and thanks for checking out this video. This is a public build series and in this particular video we're going to be doing shared components inside our app. This is an Angular app. Now if that interests you, check it out. And let's jump into the coding. If you've been following along in the series, this project should look familiar to you. If you haven't, I'll put some links up here to the previous video series so you can watch along to catch up to where we are. But basically, we have some pages and we have some services. Right now, we have we've consumed the Pokemon API, which means we are retrieving some data. And we're also using an event bus to send messages through different parts of our system. Here you can see the current app as it is with a side nav, which is using the event bus for triggering. And we also have this right nav here, as you can see that it works. But we go back to our Pokemon, as you can see it's loading, and then you select, you can ignore a bunch of that text for now. And as you can see, that will click through and it runs the appropriate load and collects that information. Okay, so this, and we can see here's the paging from the previous episode. So here we are. What are we going to do in this video? And no, my color grading is not off. I have a bit of sunburn, so I'm a bit red. Anyway, back to the video. So what I want to do today, as we sort of use components inside these pages. Now these particular pages, as I would call them, as they call them in Ionic, is really the concept of a routable component. So this is the page. So everything is a component. As we can see, it uses this component syntax, but it's not like a reusable widget. It is a destination inside your application. And I like to keep that separation of having like a home page and one of the other pages inside my application or website. And I would also sometimes have more folder structure within there as the application gets larger. So I may have stuff like Pokemon itself. Pokemons may actually sit underside a Pokemon folder as we have lots of pages related to that part. But because it's a relatively small application, we're having them just in that top right. And then we have services. So what I want to do here is I want to create another folder. I'm going to call this components. Now I know the other one are components, but this is more like what a true component is, a shared component. So the first thing I will do when I create this component is I want to create a module here that allows me to put the shared components basically inside a bucket, and then I can import those in. Now, if you look at the pages, you can see the granularity of these means that we can do individual modules for individual pages, and I could do individual modules for individual widgets. And why do you do that? Mostly around lazy loading. You only need to load the contents of a module. So if you break those modules up into smaller parts, you can load smaller amounts. Now that's quite useful because it reduces what gets loaded into memory, but at the same time, there are concerns around, well, at the same time, some of the value isn't there if we're deploying a mobile app because the app's there. I normally start sometimes with a smaller module and then look at how to break those into sub-modules around that loading and using, because if I'm using the same module, if I'm using the same set of components, repetitively, then I might as well group those reusable shared components into this one module. All right, so let's grab the homepage module. Now you can see the separation of the module being the grouping of the files, and then because this is a pages, we now have the routing module, which we normally import the router and then define the modules. Now I like this separation of what is in the module and how do I get to that module, because I could, for example, mix and match. Now I would not recommend doing that, but it is possible. So let's come back to our home module. Let's just copy this file, put it in here and paste it. I'm going to rename this because I don't want it to be home. I want this to be shared shared components. Shared components module. So not a lot of stuff should go in here, but just think about it that I don't want to create a lot of dependencies between these modules. So I like to lift that up and something that can be pulled through multiple locations. Let's just close this. Now we're not going to load the home page. We're not going to load the home page writing, but we will take the material module, and that will be just that should be up one directory. It should be there. And yep, we're not going to load that module. And declarations, because this is a shared module rather than just a loading module, we will have declarations. But the next thing that we do need, especially for this reusable part, is we need some exports, because we need to export this module so that when I get this module, what can I access inside it? Okay, so when a declaration is this is what's inside this module, but if I don't add it to the exports, if I import it somewhere else, I can't use it. And then obviously I need to change the name of the module to shared components module. All right, so without a module there, let's jump over to the app itself. It's in the recipes folder. So here we are, list. So I'm actually going to go into the component folder. Now you don't actually have to go into to run this component. You can actually run it and give a command line of where you want the file to go, but I'm just used to going into it. So now I'm going to use the Ionic CLI, so which wraps the Angular CLI. I'm going to generate a component. I'm going to call it Nav Bar, because that's something that we're going to use throughout the application. And currently, if we look at one of our pages, you will see that in the application page, we have a nav. In the home page, we have a nav bar here, and then if you go into the Pokemon page, we basically have more or less the same nav bar. So as you can see, here's this nav bar, and then we have this nav bar again. So we have this duplication of code. Okay, we have this functionality here which talks to the event service bus, and then we have this text, and then in the home you'll notice we also have an additional icon. Now that may be useful if we, for example, have a Pokemon, as we have with a Pokemon, and we want to heart that to add it to like our favorites list, or we want to potentially share something. So we have like a Pokemon on the page, and you can hit the share, and then we can trigger like a share dialogue into Twitter or Facebook or whatever. So it is quite useful to have this right-hand functionality as well as the text on the left, and it's using the Angular material theme. So we're going to refactor this into a component. Okay, and that component is called Nav Bar. So let's grab this toolbar. Yeah, and I will just go into this nav bar, and I should just paste that in for now. Okay, and I will call it nav bar in the text, so we can visually make sure that that's the correct thing being mounted. Now, at this point, I look back at what functionality is it currently doing. Is it calling any features or functions? And as I can see, it's calling this toggle start, and it's also calling this a open service bus. Okay. And then I'll also fix these labels. Okay, so this would be toggle nav menu, toggle, yeah, let's just call it nav menu, and this label we'll worry about in a little bit. Okay, so now that is done, we come back to the shared components. And I will go to the nav bar component, grab the nav bar component, and I shall now go to my shared component, and I will declare this component here. And as you can see, and then I'll do the auto import. Yep. And then I also want to export it. So I need to declare it so the component knows about it, it's imported, and then I need to export it if I want other people to be able to use it, which we do. So now, if I come back to my nav bar component, you will see that there is a selector here within the component. So this is the HTML fragment that can be used to tell Angular to render this component. Okay, so we'll go back to our home page and we will get rid of this and we will paste in a nav bar. Okay. So right now we've just pasted directly in a nav bar, and then we look at the functionality that it had. So it had this event bus, and it had this open and close event bus. So we still want to have, realistically, we more or less just want to have this toggle. This menu button here was only really for demonstration purposes and to get it working, so I'm not going to take over the open and closed end bus, as that is now configured up to work via the Pokemon service with the preview of the Pokemon data. When it runs, Squirtle, what's happening here? Error connection, have I lost internet? Site can't be reached. Oh, it's not running. Yeah, it's not going to work if it's not running. Okay, let's jump back into the Nav Bar components. For now, Nav Bar component. Add this functionality in. Toggle start. Yes, the event bus is not there yet. I've not copied it over. So we'll go back to the home page. So right now, the event bus is no longer required. So we remove it because we don't want to keep old crusty bits of code because it just creates bloat. So we'll remove it, and I'll also remove the import, and it will go back to the basic home page with no functionality, realistically. As we come to here and we import it into the constructor. I've just copy and pasted that in, and I will then tell it to import. And I will change that to be two. Is it not two? It's two directories. Alright, this is my preference for the localized import to the service, and now means that we can toggle the menu. Okay, so let's Ionic serve. Get it up and running. Now, when we do components, there are components that manage their internal state, and then there are components which are really built for reusability. And now a lot of them, they take inputs, which they then display and changes internal logic. And then after that, they will export events, etc. Okay. Oh yeah, I need to copy the styling over. So the home page. Let's look back at the home page styling. There's the toolbar styling. And we will take that into the spec. Yeah, it will follow the toolbar spacing. Nav components. What's wrong here? Console nav app bar is not known. Right. So what I've done is I believe at this point, we're not sure, but I believe that I've done this more or less correct into the shared components, but I've now referenced this app nav bar without importing it into the homepage or the homepage module. So it has no concept of the shared module container. So after this material module, which is very similar in regards to being a shared component, which we're pulling into lots of different places. So the next thing I would do is do the shared component module. Okay, and now if I save that, I expect it to be there. And you can see with the hard-coded nav. Okay, now does the click still work? Click. Yes, it does. So as you can see now, I've been able to refactor that in, and then we have this, which is pretty cool. But we don't really want a hard-coded title in every page. So let's go back to our nav component and we will do a input. So what we do here now is we will add in a title. So we will do, which is going to be passed in. So we'll make it an input. And it will be an input and it will be a public. And I shall call it nav title. I'll just call it title. Title. And it will be a string. Now, in making this an input, what it does is it says that when you bind this in, the title, I will set a value. Okay, so now when we go back to the title here, this nav here should now be title. So that is now a variable that can be passed into this component externally, and it will then render in. So I don't need to copy and paste this code just to change the title on every page. Okay, so let's go back to the usage of this inside the home page, HTML, home page, HTML, and this usage. So what we do here is we add the title and we add that to a parameter, nav bar title, and I will take that nav bar title, as we can see here. There. Now, you can keep it as HTML. It's a straightforward thing. If you could bind that to a parameter, so rather than it being a hard-coded thing, I could make this actually take in a binding. So then at that point, we need to create a page, and in this page we'll do nav bar title, and a nav bar title at that point might be Darren Rogan Polka app. And in doing that, I'm setting that variable. And then we can dynamically change that. So if we're loading data, for example, we can update that title to show the details of the object or whatever we want it to do. But it's now dynamically updatable inside the application, inside the individual page, which is using the component here. Okay. So the next thing I would do is I would determine whether or not it needs to be visible, because sometimes I might want to turn it off and on. So the next thing I would do is I would do visible, but I like to put visible with the default because I don't want to put visible visible equals equals nav bar visible. I don't want to set this every single time if I don't have to, but we will just set it here first to go through to continue to go through the example. Nav bar equals true. Now, I'm not defining the types, as you might see here. TypeScript will infer these types based from the value that's given to it, so it knows that's a string, and it knows this is a boolean. Now, as these are basically being hard-coded, not being modified, I don't really need type checking to define the type to use it a little bit later. Okay, so now we come back to our home page, back to our nav component. Okay, so then I will put a input title, and I'll do visible, and that will be a boolean, and I will say in the nav bar star ng if visible equals true. Visible does not equal false. So that means if it's not set, it will be null. So if I go here, I just want to double check I'm correct. So if I go to the home page where I'm using it and I don't supply this variable, then it will not be false, it'll be null. So it should still be seen as far as I'm aware. Exactly. So Boolean objects sort of have three states. I have nothing set, so I'm indeterminate, and true and false, sort of. It's more that the variable hasn't been set. When it is set, you can't really set it back to null. Yeah, anyway, it's fine for now, but you get the point. I can make it a little bit smarter and have a default behavior rather than just playing on the usage of a boolean. So now we have a nav bar here that we can trigger, and we can have different text. And then let's use this also in the Pokemon page, because once we move to the Pokemon page, it's going to disappear. Let's change the nav bar, which is currently being used in the Pokemon page. So in the Pokemon page, let's go to a module. I will now import the shared components module. Okay, right. It will. It will now. Can we? Come on, no, autofix. Come on, import it for me. There we go. And let's change that to. That should continue to work. So now the module is visible, which means we can use the contents of that module inside this module. So now we can use that page. So if I go back to the home page, you'll see we set up visible equals true, and we did a nav bar title. So let's take that into our Pokemon page. Okay. And rather than Pokemon app, we'll just say change this to Poka list. A lot of times this gives us context on the page that we're currently on, and we still want it visible. And then we will go to the home page, and we will take the top bar, and I will take that into the Pokemon page. And I'll replace this with that. Nice. Less code and less replacement of code. So now if I go back to the Pokemon, here's the Poke list, and as you can see this is actually returned even though it wasn't there before, mostly because it's in that shared component. Okay, so the nav bar is no longer copied from page to page. We now have our own app nav bar, which is using the toolbar from Angular, from Material UI in our nav bar component, nav bar HTML. So we have our spacer, which pushes it out, and then we have our button at the end. Now, I could potentially want multiple buttons. I could want a share and a favorite button, for example, a heart, or I could have another button here which triggers something else, be it a help functionality or a logout or whatever. But it will unlikely be a functional button like this component, as this particular component is using, if I show you again, is using the event service bus from the previous video. Now I'll put a link up here to the event service bus video if you haven't seen that one. But you can see this event service bus. So when that click is triggering that menu, so this hamburger menu as it's called because it looks a little bit like a hamburger, that is now going to have consistent behavior and always trigger this when clicked. But we don't, and that's decoupled, so there's no dependency inside the pages because the event service bus is plugged into all components and can be accessed. So we can have these decoupled events being passed through, especially for functionality like this, where it goes right up to the application. Now, that isn't the only use case for a nav bar. You generally also have not just this top level functionality, but you have a use case for the individual page. Okay, so this particular button here, for example, might be a different button somewhere else.
So we're going to pause this video here. As you've seen, we've been able to do a dynamic component that is reusable with an input, which allows us to have a consistent behavior by changing the title on page to page. And that is also externalized as a module as well as imported in. In the next video, we're going to look at how we would use that, but have different behavior on different pages, allowing us to pass in another data structure to enable that. If that interests you, follow along for the next episode. I'm Darren Rogan. Ciao.
Can I launch products on the internet that make money? You'll have to follow me to find out. Then hit the subscribe button and join me on my journey.